Welcome back to MKE Gadgets. Today we're going to talk about tap handles. There are many different types of tap handles. There are tap handles for pouring beer, like we have here, and there's tap handles that you put a tap in, and after you drill the hole, you make internal threads. There's two styles of tap handles like this. We're not going to talk about these tap handles. We're going to talk about tap handles for dispensing beer. This little mock-up here has a faucet with a tap handle screwed on. We'll take it off. And it's held on by a shank. Now, if you've recently been in prison, you might say, this isn't a shank. This is a different type of shank. This is a shank for a beer faucet. The threads on here are all standardized. And they are 3/8/16. So inside of here, the threads are 3/8/16. And if we take a tap that's marked 3/8/16 and we thread it in there, we can confirm that. Or if you put a nut on here, and this is a T-nut, you can confirm that too. Now we know this is threaded 3/8/16. You can buy these cheap, boring tap handles online or at like a homebrew store, and they're about $3, which I think is pretty expensive. Recently I was at a brewery and a brewery equipment manufacturer, and they all were using these cheap tap handles, and I think that's kind of boring, and it doesn't explain what the beer is. When I come into a bar or a brewery, I look at the tap handles, and that tells me a story of what kind of beer they have on tap. So knowing that, there's a couple things we can do. Get a piece of wood, you buy a T-nut, and this T-nut is threaded 3/8/16. You drill a hole and you pound it in, and these barbs will hold it into the piece of wood. You could always add a little glue or epoxy if it came loose. Another way is a threaded insert. So this would have 3/8/16 on the inside and a thread on the outside. You would tap the wood and then thread this in with a screwdriver. Anything out of wood could be made in a tap handle. Another way is use a coupling nut, and this happens to be a 1/4 coupling nut. But this is threaded on both sides. So you could thread this on your faucet and thread something into it. So here are some samples of tap handles I made. If you want to make 3/8/16 thread, you have to drill it 5/16 and then tap it. So here's like a little crystal ball. Here was a broken gauge off a regulator. Just drill that out and you put it on there and you get a tap handle. This has the threaded inserts drilled and tapped and screwed in. I put a little epoxy to hold it in there. Now what do you think? What is a more interesting tap handle? A deer horn or a piece of plastic? Sometimes they say you can name your beer after your tap handle or vice versa. If you're using this for a tap handle, and you could call your beer White Stag IPA. And if your friends come over and you say, try the Stag IPA, they would know what tap handle to use. A lot of people like the lemon shanty beers, and most of us have this in our refrigerator. It comes with lemon juice in it, and you squeeze it and you use it for recipes. Or you can go to the grocery store and buy this for a couple $. I filled the whole thing up with a construction adhesive, and then I put a coupling nut in there that was already threaded. You really don't need any tools for this one. This was a piece of aluminum I had. I turned on my lathe. I just put a bunch of grooves in there, kind of make it interesting. Maybe make it look like an old-fashioned beehive. So if you had a honey beer that was honey flavored, you could call it, your honey Weiss beer, and you could, say this would be the tap handle for that. I recently got some ski poles off the curb, and I cut them with a tube cutter, and I glued in a nylon coupling nut with construction adhesive. And again, you put that on your faucet, And if you named your beer Downhill Racer, cream ale or whatever, and your friends came over, they would kind of figure out what tap handle it is. Again, this is more interesting. Here's the opposite end of the ski pole, and the same thing. I made a nylon nut, glued it in there, and now you could name your beer Bunny Hill Ale or something. Some name that is associated with the tap handle. I got a golf club off the curb. Again, I cut it with a tube cutter. I threaded a piece of nylon. I glued it in. And this could be for your 19th hole porter. Again, a little more interesting than just a regular tap handle. Picked this up at a flea market, and it had a label from a national brewery on there, which I took off with some WD-40 silicone spray and got all the glue off. It's already threaded. So if you had a beer that had a triangular name, you could label it with a Sharpie, or do a vinyl graphics on it. You could do anything you wanted on it. I got this for $1. Still $2 cheaper than that. And you got a nice tap handle. Now I went to the automotive store, and they sell gear shift knobs for your car's manual transmission. Funny thing is, they're the same size, 3/16. So you could make an 8-ball beer, your 8-ball porter, your midnight porter, whatever you want to call it, and put a nice gear shift knob on there. Your 4-speed ale, whatever kind of gear shift knob you can get, and the automotive stores have some pretty interesting ones. Now, homebrewers used to get yeast in this plastic vial. And if you still have any left around, it's really easy to make a tap handle out of it. This is the coupling nut, 3/8. This is a 3/8 socketed cap screw. And you got to use a socketed cap screw because if you use a hex head bolt, the cover won't screw on. It'll be just too wide, too thick. Some people will fill this with grains. Dark grains for a dark beer, light grains for lighter beer, or a mixture of grains. And once again, that's a nice looking tap handle. Took a piece of hex aluminum, tapped it, put a couple grooves in there, and I drilled and tapped it for a spark plug. Again, a little more interesting than the plastic tap handle. This could be for your spark plug ale or your high-speed IPA, whatever. Remember, now that you got these custom tap handles, you can really have a lot of fun with them and make your beer's names appropriate to the tap handle. Here's a spent shotgun shell, piece of aluminum, drill it and tap it. You can cut that off and just slide this over. And if you made beer for a friend's wedding, you could call it wedding ale. And I think they might get a kick out of the shotgun shell. You could take the spent casing with the coupling nut, glue it on there, epoxy it on there, and that would kind of go good with your deer horn for all you deer hunters out there. So if you're a home brewer and you have a tank with a regulator on top, chances are the regulator might have fell off and got smashed. Why not make a tap handle out of it? A couple of fittings from the plumbing department of your local big box store, and you're off and running. So if you're going to use a coupling nut, you could weld anything onto it and make practically anything into a tap handle. An old wrench, an old tool, anything you find laying around. If you have a piece of wood, you could use a T-nut or a thread insert and make a tap handle. So this is MKE Gadgets, and we just talked about tap handles today and how to make your tap handles a little more interesting, a little more related to your beer's name. When your friends come over, maybe it'll spark a conversation on how did you get these cool tap handles. This is MKE Gadgets. Thanks for viewing, and please subscribe to my channel.